Hello, I'm pastel artist Debbie Harding, and I want to welcome you to Pastel Tapas. Today I'm going to do something just slightly different. In the past, my YouTube channel has been kind of a hybrid between some time-lapse kind of sped-up demos where I'm showing you highlights and not really explaining too much about the demo process, and that mixed in with some really great location videos and photos that I sprinkle in, I think artistically, to just give you a flavor of what the area was like where I drew inspiration for that painting. And I have quite a few, just in the few months I've been on YouTube now, where I have done kind of that kind of a format. Today I'm going to focus on giving you just a little bit more demo. I still will put in a little bit of the location video from here and maybe some of the stills that I shot, just to give you an idea, but it's not going to be mixed in quite as much as it has been in my other Pastel Tapas videos. So enjoy this. It's slightly longer than the other videos I have made because I'm giving you more real-time, more of a real-time look at the demo itself. And let me know what you think. If you'd like to make a comparison, please do check out my other Pastel Tapas videos. I'd sure like to have you do that and let me know which you prefer. And maybe they're both good. They're just different. Okay, thanks, and let's get started on this next demo that I'm doing. This is a scene that I did on location. This is actually a plein air piece that I did at Gray's Marsh Farm. And they have an amazing lavender field there. And I was there with my friend Sharon, and we just stood at the top of the hill and painted this wonderful vista. This is a great piece for trying to understand how to do the vanishing lines. Of course, rows of lavender are great for that. And also for trying to get a feel for how you change the color in a field like that as it is receding to the distance. So if you'd like to learn some of those little tidbits, then do watch. What I'm going to do in this video is I will do some narration and instruction, kind of explanation of my painting for a while. Then I am going to speed it up some in the middle and put some music to it so that you can watch the middle part just to some music, and then I'll come back at the end and explain a little bit more of my final marks and things. So stick around to the end. I do think that it's surprising how a pastel piece will go from looking kind of rugged at the beginning, maybe even through 60% of it, and then at the end it all starts pulling together, and I think you're going to be very surprised to see that. I want to walk with you up to the place where I sat with my friend Sharon a couple of years ago, and we painted this wonderful lavender field. And I just want to take a little bit of a pause here and show you these rows that I'm looking at. The fragrance is just amazing, and what a place for the bees. They're just busy at work here. Thought it was getting a little bit noisy. Of course, this is a farm, and something's going on. Looks like maybe irrigation. And we sat right on this hill here and painted this wonderful scene. So as you can see here, I'm using my iPhone to draw from, and part of the reason I do that is I take a picture of the scene so I can make sure that I have it in case I have to leave for some reason, and then I can finish at home. But I also like having boundaries around it, and I know a lot of artists use some sort of a device, to a viewfinder, to see the boundaries in what they're painting when they're plein air painting. I enjoy doing it this way. And it also enabled me to give you an image to look at on the screen here too. So I've divided the horizontal planes off, and now I'm drawing in those very angular rows that are disappearing into kind of a point in the distance. And it's also a sloping hill, so it's a little bit complicated in that the lavender in the foreground is quite looming and large compared to what you see kind of in the middle of the image. And I'm just blocking in roughly, as you can see, where the rows are going. And they do kind of start angling off to the right as they get further away. And then back in that right corner, there was a little bit of an area where they had already harvested the lavender, so it had a little different look to it. I think I'm using a new pastel. It's probably, what do they call that? Spruce, blue spruce, I think is the color, and it's a great color for blocking in. And I'm putting in the darks in the background. And now I'm going to start with an underpainting. And I'm not sure if this makes sense to you or not, but I like to choose complementary colors for underpaintings a lot of the times. And especially when it's a painting that has a lot of one kind of local color to it, as with this purple lavender that's growing here. So I chose this complementary orange that is really quite bright, and I'm putting that in the sections where the lavender is going to be growing in the foreground area. And then you'll see that I'm using other colors in other places too. It's going to be kind of a detailed underpainting, and it's a dry underpainting because I'm painting this on Sennelier Lacarte pastel card, which cannot take wet underpainting. And you know, I could have just gone with the color of the paper, which is a nice color to begin with, but I wanted to have some of that really hot and bright color popping through in case I left little vacant spots or speckles. And you can see as I get farther off into the distance, I'm choosing cooler and cooler colors. And the reason for that is because I want to make sure that the things in the distance will have that distant quality to them. And when you look at things in the distance, the colors do tend to get cooler. So that's why I chose then that pink in the middle ground there, and now this lavender. And I'm blocking in lavender in the sky too, which is often a color that I use for that. And even though I've just been talking about bringing the cool colors in the background, another little trick I do is using lavender underneath a sandy path, or kind of this caramel color, which would be similar to a sandy path. In this case, it's dried grass, but I really enjoy seeing that color under there, which is a complementary color to that. Purple and yellow are complements, and so that would be the complement of this path. Now what I'm using here is pipe foam insulation, and I'm smearing this in when I have vacant spots, little speckles showing through. I don't have lighter color. Although this darker color Lacarte paper isn't quite like using the beige UArt, which I use so often. That tends to look more speckly. Excuse me. So just reinforcing that color a little bit more here. and using the side of the pastel with not a lot of pressure. It's kind of a light touch because I don't want to fill the tooth up too much. And what you're going to find out in this beginning part of this is that I'm going to, most of the time it's going to be real time, but occasionally I speed it up just to expedite some of these areas, the processes here, so it's not quite so long. And as you can see, I'm standing in the shade of some poplar trees, and as the sun is, it's a windy day, and as the sun is blowing the trees, there's going to be a little bit of color or light changing on the paper as the sun pops through every now and then. And also you'll recognize that it's a windy day too, because even though I had my hair tied back, which I thought would do the trick, the wind was catching my little bits of hair and sometimes blowing it in front of the picture, and I apologize for that. But I don't think it's too disruptive, and there's a lot you can see where you don't see my hair there. Just know that I bought myself a baseball cap, so future videos I'll have that situation solved a little bit better. But whenever you start with pastels, I shouldn't say whenever, but generally, you put the darks down first, and that's why I am putting those down. And I started with that blue spruce, and now I've changed the color up a couple of times just to vary the darks that are back there. And you'll find that as I go, I'm going to lighten this up a bit and not leave it quite so dark. Plus, as I work the sky in, I'm going to make it a lot airier looking, but this is just massing in the basic shapes right now. And it looks like I was describing something at that point, I'm sure, about the direction the sun was shining. And actually, when I painted this, I was narrating and talking through the process as I go. I decided to just dub over it for this because it was windy, and periodically the sound wasn't the best. So here's another fix. I bought myself a really great microphone, a Rode Wireless 2 that I'll be using in future videos too. But I think this works, and it gives me a chance to watch it over again and contemplate why I did certain things. And at this point, I've got a little bit of a lighter color, and I'm just working the tops of the trees and the bushes back there to give them probably a more pleasing shape. And there is a little house that's peeking out right to the right of those taller trees, which I'm sure are more poplar trees. They have that kind of long, narrow shape to them. So picking out a new color here, and often that's what I would do, is hold it up and against what I was going to be painting to see if it was the color I wanted. And what I'm looking for is kind of a very light, warmer blue, kind of a turquoise blue, since I'm not seeing the sky really high up, but it's staying quite low to the horizon. I want to keep it that color. So I was just comparing to see which one matched the color I saw in the sky the most. And also, I know that as I work down towards the very bottom near the trees, I'll be putting in a very, very light yellow in that area also. And now you'll see that I'm just drawing in the roof line of that house that's in the distance to hold its place, just to remind me that it's there so I don't accidentally cover over it when I'm putting the sky in. So I really am just trying to fill the space up right now, and working around the trees and the crowns of the trees. Um, I I do brush off my pastel occasionally if I feel like it's picking up too much of the dark color. But what I'm going to do is be carving into the trees over time and really developing the shape of the tree a little bit more. that process will happen as I go. Right now it's just a matter of filling the space up with color. So again, holding the color up to just test against what I'm seeing there. I chose a color that is very, very light yellow. The value of it is so light, and I'm going to try to keep it going fairly straight across as I'm kind of tucking it in between the trees there. In other words, I'm not going to follow the top of the tree line and putting it in. And just carving into the trees some more. Even started putting in a few sky holes here and there, just to make the shapes a little more interesting. You'll notice I am wiping the pastel off in between. I don't want to drag that dark color back up into the sky. I'll eventually be trying to knit these two colors together a little bit more, and it won't have quite that abrupt change that you're seeing right now. And then I'll go back also. You can see that I'm covering up the tree in some places and kind of overlapping a lot, and I'll go back with the tree colors and redefine some of those branches and things. But this paper I was using was fairly dark, kind of a dark caramel color, and I didn't like that showing through, so I'm just smoothing it out a little bit to get a little bit of a smoother look, and trying to hide those brownish speckles that are showing through. I don't blend with my hand very often. It's kind of rare, and there are certain cases when you want to do that, but typically it's best to go back over after that with some fresh pastel and add some more layers of fresh pastel on top, so that you can get that vibrancy back, because when you smooth it out like that, you're actually crushing the small particles of pastel, and it becomes duller looking. So here, as I said, I was going to pick out a color to kind of marry those two together a little better, so the change wasn't so abrupt. And I also felt like it's just lightening the sky just a tad too. But the more you go back and forth with colors like this, the more pastel you're adding to the paper, you're going to find that the pastels themselves will start blending one another, and I won't have to keep rubbing it with my finger to get the blending happening. So these are poplar trees, and a lot of the sky holes in them are very vertical like that, because the branches kind of start from the trunk and grow straight up, and so you get a lot of that kind of look. So I'm just started out with my sky holes, adding that look to it there, and I'm sure I'll be working that and fixing that as I go. Here I said I wasn't going to touch the paper more, and I did. I don't usually, I am not usually blending with my finger too much. Now, one of the things that you will find that is helpful when you're putting a sky hole in is to tap it a little bit, and you'll see me do that. Put the sky hole in and tap it just to get the intensity of the color down a little bit. At each pass through, just really helps to define the shapes a little bit better and cleans them up a little bit more too. I should be getting done with the sky pretty soon. Looks like we're gonna, yep, I'm looking for a new color here, holding them up. If you haven't done this before, I really recommend it. I think it's helpful to get a closer color to what you're actually seeing if you hold it up like that. When you're plein air painting, it's not always the easiest thing because as you hold it up, the lighting can kind of play with your eyes a little bit. I find that when I am painting in my studio and I hold the color next to the image on my iPad that I'm copying or next to a photo, it's a lot easier to see than trying to hold it up in bright sunlight or in dappled light, which was the case on this day when I was working. So now I'm going to get started on the rose of lavender. And I really am following the basic rule of thumb for pastel work, and I'm going to put in the darks first and get the shadowy color that I see poking out underneath the tops of the lavender. I'm going to put that down first. And you'll notice that as the lavender moves across to the right, the rows are starting to become more compressed and angled a little bit more. So I'm trying to capture that look here. And the tops of the lavender kind of flow together more. You don't see so much of the row, and so I wasn't as careful to draw rows in. I was just kind of putting the color in a larger mass as I got farther and farther to the right. And yeah, just defining the edges of those rows as they come out. I made them, I guess, just a little bit too short in places. Now I'm going to start putting in this other little patch of lavender over on that side, and those rows were already harvested, and so they had kind of a different look to them, and they really didn't stand out too much as rows. It was just a wonderful kind of speckled mottle green color, and so I was not putting in real defined rows there. And you can't see in the reference photo, but there's just a tiny little bit more of some actual lavender flowers growing off to the side there that I will be putting in later with a lighter purple. So now I picked up that kind of toned orange. It's kind of a caramely color to put in between the rows where I see that dried grass growing. Of course, it's not going to go between the rows all the way over to the right because the rows, like I said, are getting kind of compressed as you go to the right. And I have several different colors that I'm going to use, scumbling over one another in the grasses, starting off with this deeper color, and then I'm going to pick out some. This one I think is even grayer than the other one, and just toning it down a bit. And then some of the other ones I'll pick out, you'll see, will be lighter in color where I'm adding the sunlight, which is going to kind of give you more of the shape of the land back there. Right now it's very flat and you don't see much shape to it. So just to be consistent, I'm adding that color into the rows in the foreground also. Over time, as I work these two different areas, the colors may change slightly because there might be more light shining in one spot than another. But I just wanted to get all of that worked in the places where I can see it. And I have to just say that what I was actually seeing is just a slightly different than the reference photo. I think that I was seeing things from just a little bit higher vantage point than what you're seeing here in this photo. But you can just imagine, and it's not that much off. I think that it's very similar. So in putting in the darks, one of the dark places I see is definitely the shadow that's being cast on the left-hand side of the bushes there, of the lavender bushes. And you can't see that particular side in this reference photo, but it's obviously there. And the front of the lavender right here I was seeing quite nicely. And so when you're looking at the front of the row and you see that first bush as it starts the row off, you're seeing underneath the bush, and there is quite a lot of shadow that's being cast from the bush on that side. So I'm putting that down in the front, and also it's nice to put a darker color down in the front, especially in the corners, to kind of ground the painting. I like to do that even at times when I don't see a darkness there. I add a little bit just to keep your eye from flowing off the paper. It just kind of keeps you grounded in the composition. So now I've chosen another dark, but this one has more red in it. It's more of a wine color, and I'm going to put that down as a first layer on the tops of the lavender. But you can see what I like to do with lavender is to start making my marks in the shape of the mounds that are growing there. You know, even though it looks like one straight row, there really are mounds growing in the individual plants. And by starting out by putting the first color down with this directional quality to it, I think goes a long way in giving the feeling of the growth habit of the plant. And painting lavender, you really you have to paint what you see and not what you think. I mean, I know that there are individual little spikes of flowers that are growing, radiating from the middle of the plant. When you're looking at lavender fields and you see them off in the distance, you're not seeing that. You're seeing the effect of the distance, and you're looking down on top of it, and you're not really seeing how they're growing. However, there is just this slight little movement there, and I like to get that in first. Now you see I didn't do it all the way back, and I didn't do it in the far right corner because that's just too far away. So now I'm doing the shadow. Now the shadow started out as just one mass, but then as it moves away from the plant, you're starting to see the shadows cast by those spikes of flowers. And so it's kind of a spiky looking shadow. I start with this darker color, and I'm going to be adding lighter colors as I go on top of that shadow also. So what does this remind you of? This is not too unlike doing the tops of the trees and working the sky back in. So if you can just imagine, those shadow marks were like putting in the crown of the tree, and now I'm going back in with the path and working the path back in and creating more shapes and defining things more. So I just, I work all around my painting. I don't start with one end and work through to the other, but as I see things, that's when I work on it. And obviously, I'm just needing to define the little house a little more. And now I've picked out a much lighter green and giving those bushes in front of the house a little more definition. And I'll do the same thing to the trees also. So now testing out different purples to see which one I really am seeing there. I'm going to start getting more of the local color in, and it seems like I picked out a lighter one to put on top of those rows. And I'm going to do a similar thing there with that little scooping shape in some places. I want to get that look on even these distant ones. And if you look carefully enough at the photo, you're going to see that you actually see that happening. Now I was able to draw in my video a little closer here so you could really watch that happening and see how the just that little bit of motion is starting to give you the impression that there are individual rounded bushes there. So I've sped this up because it's a lot of the same. and just wanted to get through that. And of course, as I was working my way toward that area over on the right, I'm not, the detail is going to be less and less as I go. I really am going to focus the detail more to the middle and more to the left. That's where the path is drawing you in. So when I look at the photo, I can see a little bit of green, especially this area. This is where they've already harvested lavender. And I want to say that that green, even when you're looking at it close up, can seem awfully cool. It's a cooler green, but now that it's in the distance too, I wanted to keep it very subdued and very cool. So I'm using a super, super light touch on that. I hardly scumbled any of that green over the top. And now I'm going to put some of that same green peeking out just a few little places in this distant area here. I don't want to put a lot of it. You really can't see it that well from so far away. And that's what you want to do when you're doing a landscape like that, is kind of pay attention to what your eyes are actually able to see and read, and not put more detail there than you're actually seeing. And remember, I said I was going to pick out some lighter colors. Well, here we are. And these lighter colors are going to go a long way in giving that hillside back there a little bit of shape. The sun is hitting it straight on, but since it has some mounds to it, there are places where there are some shadows, and so I want to start pulling those lights and shadows out of that. So at this point, I'm going to stop the narration and I'm going to speed it up and add some music to it so you can enjoy watching it with music, and it'll make the demo just a little bit shorter that way. Hang on till the end, because I'm going to come back at the end and talk through the final marks to you and let you know how I decided to end this piece, so you won't want to miss that. If you would like to see the full version of this where I actually am talking as I'm working, please do check out my Patreon page. That's an awesome place where you can connect with me on a different level and not only watch real-time demos with narration, teaching, and my musings as I'm thinking about the different steps, but I also have a lot of other really interesting and great content too. I'm so busy at work and posting numerous things each month, and it's only $5 a month and you can cancel at any time. What a pleasure it would be to meet you, and I look forward to seeing you there. just changed the battery in my camera, and here is a little bit of a view of the surrounding area off in the distance. Look at that. Look at all the folks here. All of those bushes out there are raspberries and blackberries, and in the back are the blueberries. It's kind of nice to step back from your work and see the impression it gives when you're looking at it from a distance, and that's what I see right here. So I'm glad you waited around to the end, because now we're going to start looking at some of these final marks. And as I said earlier, this to me is one of the most exciting parts. You'll see that I chose a mid-value green to start putting into some of the little nooks and crannies where I can see green poking through. There isn't a lot of it, and it really is most noticeable where the breaks are in the bushes themselves, and more in the front. You'll see we'll add some in the front of each of these rows. But if you'll remember, throughout the middle, what I was doing was really building up the color, and I started with a very bright kind of magenta wine color that is warmer. And the reason I laid that down first was to warm the foreground up, to kind of pull it forward. I didn't put any of that color in the background at all. And so that's going to help to push the lavender that's in the background back. And so I've now picked out a lighter green, kind of a brighter green that would be the one that's catching the real sunlight. There's little bits and pieces of that flashing in, but not a lot of it. I'm starting out with some fairly large tick marks. I mean, it's not little lines. I know that the lavender is growing up in sprigs or in spikes, but I'm not going to try to get that look in there right now. So, as I've said before, I do work all around my painting and just pick out things that strike me at the time. So I'm focused now on trying to get that little house back there in order. When something is so far away like that, you're only making very suggestive little marks. And I started out with a darker color and now have put some highlights on it to just kind of make it pop out. And just now reworking the trees. I left them for quite a long time and they look pretty rough. And I want to tidy up the shapes and really do some more work on them to make them look like they, well, to give them a pleasing shape. And I did that with the darker color that I began with, and now I'm going to test out some lighter colors to put on top to just give more form to that bush that's growing there in front of the house. I want a little bit of light to catch it. I don't want it to be quite so dark. And actually what happened during the day is as the sun was moving, the lighting back there changed. The trees were quite dark when we first got there, and then the sun started shining on them and you could see more detail. But I don't want to make them all warm and bright. I want to have them kind of recede in the background. So I chose a pretty cool and toned down green. I would say it's more like in the turquoise family. And when you tone something, it just means that gray is added to it, so it makes it kind of a, I don't know what's a good word. I want to say dirty, but it's not brown. It's muted. And that's the color I'm putting down here, a cool muted green color, even on the poplars. And remember, I put all those sky holes in, and I'm going over some of them. They're not going to all be quite as defined as the ones that I first put down. But this is just giving a little bit of shape to the trees. There doesn't need to be a lot there because they're so far away. And back in this area, it's even one step further back, and so that'll really be much less defined. And I like having kind of that feathery, soft edge at the top of the trees, and so as I was scumbling towards the top, I kind of overlapped it up into the sky a little bit. So now it looks like I'm going to probably choose something to go back and rework the sky a little bit more. You know, it's a kind of a back and forth kind of a dance, and I'm sorry about my hair. When I'm working close like that, I lean in more, and on this windy day, I didn't realize how my hair was getting in the way. But just little tiny suggestive marks here and there, just to help you realize that that's a house back there. I wanted to, I'm not going to work on any detail whatsoever. These are all just the marks that kind of give the outline and the basic shape of the house. And I think there were some, oh, that's the edge of the roof line. I think I will put some little windows in there. Seems like the light was glinting off of the glass, and so rather than a dark space like so often is put on the window, I have a little bit of light shining there. Sometimes it's hard to even make a spot that small. So a lot of this is just the final marks of cleaning up and touching up, putting a little more highlight on the back hills and the pathway to define it a little bit. This is interesting in front here. As I was looking at the edges of the plant, I realized that you were really seeing through the plant a lot, and what you were seeing behind it was the pathway. And I felt like I had it just too solid. And so I wanted to pull some of the path color back up into the lavender itself. And that's why I'm putting that color in there. And I probably will go back and redefine some of those little lavender spikes after the fact, but it's a back and forth kind of a thing. And wow, I even just covered that one up. This is one of the fun things about going back and dubbing over your piece after you've painted it, because you watch it so carefully and see things that you did that you weren't even thinking about at the time. I often will get to a certain point and think, wow, the shadows just need to be reinforced. And especially in the front, I will do that probably more than once. And I'm putting in some other colors instead of just that very dark eggplant color. And this is probably, is that eggplant? It might be. It might have been just one step lighter, though. I typically want to have more than one color in a shadow. So I put the green in, but you just don't want to have chunks of green. You want to have flowers overlapping that. And so now I'm going back with purple and putting that in. And as I said, I'm going to work those little spikes coming out and have that look a little more airy on the side. Sometimes I'm using the side of my pastel. I find that that's helpful to, even when you're getting the end marks in, sometimes I will feel like the smaller marks that I'm making start becoming too busy. And so I'll do one of several things. Either I'll use the side of a pastel and kind of scumble over it a little bit to even it out and hide some of that busyness. Or I might use a very soft brush and very lightly wisp over the top to to knock down some of that detail. Or in the past, if I want to add more texture too, I'll give it a couple spritzes of Blair Low Odor Fixative. So it kind of depends upon what I'm working on. I don't feel like I am running out of tooth necessarily here, and so I'm not going to use a fixative, but I'm using other techniques, and one of them was the side of the pastel. Now you can see as you're getting closer like this, the actual flowers are starting to take shape, or the spikes, you're starting to see them more. I will give hints of that as you move back, but when you get closer, I'm going to use the end of the pastel and make smaller lines, because you actually see them more right here. And you don't want to have them all just sticking straight up. Some of them are going to be leaning a little bit. And if you take a look at what a lavender bush looks like, the ones down at the bottom edge are leaning quite far out into the pathway even, and overlapping the pathway. So this is, I vary, when I'm doing lavender, I like to really vary the colors. I don't just pick a purple. Like you saw, I use the magenta, and then I have a darker purple and a lighter purple, and I have put blue in before. And there are times when you're looking at it and you see little hints of blue, and if you put some of that in, it just really makes the color in the lavender so much more exciting. Now, of course, I had the shadow from the poplar trees hanging over here and just catching the top of the bushes. And I thought that that was pretty interesting. So I went in and put the shadow in, and now I'm going to put some very shadowy green. So I picked a very deep, cool green, and that's going to be the green color that you see in the lavender itself. The sun isn't hitting it, and so it has to stay very cool and pretty deep like that. I don't want to get rid of all of the dark from the shadows. And changing my mark shapes. Now I'm doing some thinner marks. That's some of the green that you see as you're looking at it close up. You do see some of that. I wouldn't want to put a lot in. I'm going to use that very judiciously and just put a little bit. And a couple little ticks of light just to give it a little more definition. But that's not really where the light is hitting a lot. The light is mostly out just a bit like that. And that's good. That draws your eye in, and it actually, when you keep the light and the real heavy detail away from the very edges, it keeps your eye from running off the page. And that's why I keep those shadows pretty deep in the corners like that, to help you to not pay too much attention there, but to look into the piece and to follow your way up into the piece. So now I picked out a very bright, almost chartreuse color. And boy, this is one that I really will hardly put any of that in. This is just where the sun is sparkling the most on some of those little bits of green. And what that is it really adds a lot, but it's a funny thing. You can very, very quickly go from it being great to being way overdone. So see, now what I've picked out is I probably want to get just a little bit more of a definition. I think one of the things I think I was struggling with my colors was finding a light enough color to add a little bit of the sunlight hitting the top of the lavender, but obviously that pink I picked out didn't work. But sometimes that's what I'll do, is I'll just try little touches of it on and see what it looks like. And so I'm not sure which one I ended up with here. Probably that. It's just a lighter, well, that's especially good in the background. Now see, that was a very toned color and didn't have a lot of chroma in it. Now I've gotten a little brighter here. So that ends the demo, and I just am so delighted that you waited around to the end to see these really wonderful final marks. I might have taken it home and added a few things to it, but not much. You can see that in the middle ground there, I kind of added a little bit more definition to the top of the bushes on the left. But I think what you saw is pretty much the ending of this. So did you have fun painting this with me? It sure was a lot of fun. And I certainly enjoyed trying to capture all of these rows and the disappearing, the vanishing points, and trying to get that depth in there by creating a more muted and toned color in the background. All of that just works together to create a very pleasing landscape, and you just can't go wrong when you have something as gorgeous as this, can you? And look at today. Wow. Those clouds are fabulous, and I think I've got to use this as a reference photo. This is so neat. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me, and there's more to come. Bye-bye.